After a few days to the conditional one-sided cessation of hostilities, the General Command of the Syrian army said in a statement that the armed forces will resume its combat operations against the Turkish-backed terrorists in Idlib because the radical militants didn't abide by the Sochi agreement. In other words, the Syrian army gave Turkey the opportunity to enforce the agreement on its proxies in the de-escalation zone by withdrawing the militants 20 kilometers from the front line into Idlib, disarming the hardcore jihadists, and stop shelling the residential towns in the northern parts of Hama. But as I mentioned many times on Syriana Analysis, Turkey neither has the interest nor the will in implementing the agreement until Ankara imposes new realities underground in northern Syria, and this could only happen through changing the demographics of the area and Turkification of the people. Last time I talked about this topic, it stirred controversy due to the lack of knowledge of some people regarding the intentions of neo-Ottoman Erdogan and the history of the region. So let me be clear one more time. Erdogan's Turkey has geopolitical ambitions, and one of these ambitions passes through Syria. Taking this into consideration, Erdogan wants to grab more lands from Syria through the so-called safe zone, which is nothing but a fancy term to occupation. Turkey will eventually withdraw its occupying forces from Syria, but it will only do so when Ankara imposes a status quo stretched from Idlib to Kamishli, where pro-Erdoganists are intended to replace the indigenous people of the area in order to create a client entity that pursues Turkey's interests instead of that of Syria. This might sound surreal to some, but Turkey already occupies the Syrian Iskenderun, and after decades of occupation, new realities have been imposed on the people, particularly through demographic change and Turkification. Israel does the same thing in the occupied Palestinian territories, and no one can stop the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous people. But in my opinion, the Turkish occupation is far more dangerous than the Israeli one for a simple reason. Israel cannot Judaize the Muslims and Christians of Palestine, whereas Turkey, considering the historical, cultural, and religious factors, is able to Turkify the Syrian refugees in Turkey and the displaced Syrians in Afrin, Jarablus, Manbij, etc. Why do you think Erdogan is granting citizenship to tens of thousands of Syrian refugees? And why is he sending thousands back to Idlib or to the north? Think about it. Don't you think Turkey is changing the demographics of the area in a bid to call for a referendum in the future that calls for the separation of these areas and their accession to Turkey, or at least a referendum that leads to an autonomous entity? And despite what we hear in the media about a big rift between the US and Turkey over the Kurds of the north, the United States doesn't want to see a unilateral Turkish incursion into the north, but hopes to reach an agreement with Ankara that gives Turkey the green light to occupy 15-kilometer and joint patrols instead of 40-kilometer and absolute Turkish control with the participation of Turkish-backed armed groups. Russia's position, on the other hand, is clear. The Syrian army alone can control the border and ensure the security of neighboring countries, but Moscow is still aiming to bring Ankara away from NATO. Therefore, the Kremlin is not being tough enough with Erdogan. To prevent this scenario, the Kurdish separatists should come to the conclusion that they are first and foremost Syrians, and they should reopen channels of diplomacy with the Syrian government instead of stubbornness that might lead to a new Turkish occupation of Syrian territories. Syrian Analysis is an independent news and analysis outlet. Please don't hesitate to support the channel through Patreon, link in the description below, because this is the only way to empower independent journalism that brings you facts instead of fake news.